There is a category of weapon that does not appear in any arms control treaty. It requires no warhead. It carries no explosive charge. It does not accelerate a projectile toward a target. And it does not produce a thermal or kinetic event that an opposing force's defensive systems are designed to detect and neutralize. It is, in every legal classification that the international community has agreed upon, not a weapon at all. It is a firefighting tool, a humanitarian instrument used by emergency responders to cool burning structures and disperse gatherings without lethal force. It is also, when mounted on a 12,000-ton China Coast Guard vessel and directed at the radar arrays of a transiting U.S. Navy destroyer, a precision instrument for degrading mission capability without crossing the threshold that would require a military response. The water cannon changes the geometry of gray zone confrontation in a specific way. A warship that alters course to avoid a collision threat has provided footage of an American vessel yielding to Chinese presence. But a warship that holds course while its aft radar arrays are systematically saturated with high-pressure salt water, while its electronic warfare antennas sustain conductive contamination, while its communication systems are degraded by moisture penetration of sealed housings that were not engineered to withstand sustained hydraulic pressure, has provided something different. It has demonstrated the cost of standing still, not the footage cost, the operational cost, the quiet, undramatic, completely deniable cost of a Coast Guard vessel doing what Coast Guard vessels do with firefighting equipment in international waters, while a U.S. ship holds its course and absorbs the consequences. This was the calculation that the commanding officer of a U.S. guided missile destroyer faced at 9:17 a.m. in the South China Sea, 14 nautical miles southwest of Scarborough Shoal, when the China Coast Guard vessel Haijing 5204 completed its approach from the northeast and settled onto a parallel course at 340 yards off the destroyer's starboard beam. Haijing 5204 was not a typical China Coast Guard cutter. The Type 818 class vessels that China had introduced to its Coast Guard fleet from 2021 onward represented a deliberate choice to blur the line between Coast Guard and naval capability in a hull that carried civilian administrative framing. At 12,000 tons displacement, the Haijing 5204 was larger than most of the U.S. Navy's guided missile destroyers. Its 4 water cannon systems, 2 forward, 2 aft, each capable of delivering a sustained stream of seawater at a pressure of 2.4 megapascals and a range exceeding 100 meters, had been specifically configured in its operational deployment for a purpose that no Coast Guard doctrine manual described, but that its crew had practiced in the South China Sea on multiple documented occasions. It had approached the destroyer at 9:09 a.m. from a position that the CIC had been tracking since 8:44 a.m., initially at 12 nautical miles, on a course that appeared to be a standard northbound patrol track. Then at 8:51 a.m., adjusting to a course that placed it on a converging line with the destroyer's freedom of navigation track. The convergence was not subtle. The tactical officer had flagged it within 4 minutes of the course adjustment. By 9:04 a.m., the Haijing 5204's intent was clear. It was going to pull alongside. CPA estimate? The captain had asked. CPA 320 yards if we hold course, and the Haijing maintains current track. Estimated time to parallel course position, 8 minutes. 320 yards. Not a collision course. Not a geometry that required emergency maneuvering under any reading of the COLREGS. A shoulder approach, the same doctrine that Russia practiced in the Baltic, adapted for the South China Sea, and executed by a vessel that was, on paper, a Coast Guard ship conducting maritime law enforcement in waters that China claimed as sovereign. The captain had held course. The Haijing had pulled alongside. At 9:17 a.m., it was at 340 yards off the starboard beam, matching the destroyer's 11-knot transit speed within half a knot, its parallel course so precise that the relative bearing between the two ships had not varied by more than 2 degrees in the 4 minutes since it achieved station. It was there. It was not going anywhere. Its bridge windows were clearly visible from the destroyer's bridge wing, and the bridge windows of the Haijing's bridge were occupied by people who were watching the U.S. ship with the same careful attention that the U.S. ship's crew was directing at them. At 9:17 a.m., the Haijing 5204's forward port water cannon activated. The stream was visible from the destroyer's bridge immediately, a high-pressure arc of seawater departing the Haijing's foredeck at an angle calculated to land not on the destroyer's hull, but on its aft superstructure, specifically on the housing cluster that contained the destroyer's SPY-1D radar panels on the starboard aft quadrant, the SLQ-32 electronic warfare antenna array, and the satellite communication dome that fed the ship's primary encrypted link to 7th Fleet Command in Yokosuka. The water cannon's range was 100 meters. The separation between the two ships was 340 yards, 311 meters. The cannon was reaching across that gap with a stream that, at its current angle and pressure setting, was landing approximately 80 meters short of the destroyer's aft superstructure. Short, but not maximally short. The Haijing's cannon had the range to reach the destroyer. It was not, at 9:17 a.m., hitting the destroyer's systems. It was demonstrating that it could. The bridge crew on the destroyer saw the stream clearly. It was 9:17 a.m. in the South China Sea. Visibility excellent, the moderate southeast swell producing a 2-foot chop that both ships were moving through in the same rhythm, and a high-pressure water arc departing the Haijing's foredeck and landing 80 meters short of the aft superstructure was not ambiguous. It was not a navigation safety device being tested. It was not a firefighting drill. It was aimed. The captain stood at the center bridge window. The water cannon stream was visible to his right, a white arc against the blue of the South China Sea, falling short for now. He made no movement. He said nothing for 11 seconds. Then, CPA to Haijing. Haijing is holding 340 yards. Parallel course, matching our speed. CPA stable at current relative position. Log the water cannon activation. Time, bearing, estimated range of stream. Photography, if we have it. Aye, already logging. The documentation was the first response. Before any tactical decision, before any escalation, the encounter needed to be recorded with the precision that would make it useful in the after-action report, in the communication to 7th Fleet Command, in any subsequent diplomatic exchange that referenced what had happened here. The water cannon activation at 9:17 a.m. with the stream landing 80 meters short of the aft superstructure with the Haijing at 340 yards was a documented event from the moment it happened. At 9:19 a.m., the Haijing activated its second water cannon. The forward-starboard system on the opposite side of its bow from the first. The second stream was directed at a slightly different angle, its arc landing approximately 65 meters from the destroyer's forward superstructure. The SPY-1D forward array housing, the AN/SPG, 62 illuminator radars, the communications masts clustered forward of the bridge. The Haijing was simultaneously demonstrating coverage of the destroyer's forward and aft electronics clusters, not hitting, showing reach. The financial arithmetic of what was at risk was specific. The SPY-1D radar system, the core of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer's air and surface search capability, represented approximately $220 million in replacement value as an integrated system. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite added $40 million. The satellite communication dome was a $12 million component. Saltwater intrusion into any of these systems, not catastrophic flooding, just sustained high-pressure saltwater contact on sealed housings and antenna connectors that were rated for marine environment, but not for direct hydraulic pressure application at 2.4 megapascals, would produce contamination effects that the ship's electronic systems maintenance crew would be managing for weeks after the transit. Mission degradation, not mission loss. Degradation, the quiet, unglamorous, completely deniable operational cost of holding a course. The Haijing was not trying to sink the destroyer. It was trying to demonstrate that holding the course had a price. The captain's standing order was course 235 degrees, speed 11 knots. The course had not changed. The first friction arrived at 9:22 a.m. from inside the ship. The electronic systems maintenance officer reached the bridge with a report. The starboard aft SLQ-32 antenna housing was showing an anomalous moisture reading in its internal environment sensor, not saltwater intrusion. The housing was sealed and had not been directly hit, but the ambient moisture level inside the housing had elevated by 4% in the past 6 minutes, consistent with the high humidity microenvironment created by a sustained high-pressure water stream landing within 80 meters of the antenna in 85-degree Fahrenheit air at 78% relative humidity. The stream was not hitting the antenna. The mist cloud, produced by the stream's impact on the sea surface, combined with the ambient humidity of the South China Sea morning, was slowly building a moisture environment around the antenna housing that was still within operational parameters, but was trending in the wrong direction. Not a failure, not even close to a failure. A trend. The maintenance officer delivered the report in the flat, factual tone of a technical professional presenting data. He did not recommend a course change. He did not editorialize. He presented the moisture reading, the trend rate, the operational parameter boundary, and the time estimate for when the trend, if it continued, would reach 80% of the parameter limit. Time estimate, 47 minutes at current trend rate. 47 minutes of the Haijing at 340 yards and 2 water cannons, creating a high humidity microenvironment around the destroyer's aft electronics housing before the moisture reading reached 80% of the threshold that would require the maintenance team to take the SLQ-32 offline for inspection. The captain heard the report. He registered the 47-minute window. He said, "Continue monitoring. Report at 15-minute intervals." The maintenance officer returned below, course 235 degrees. The Haijing was still at 340 yards. Both water cannons were still active, their streams landing short in the gap between the two ships. At 9:24 a.m., the Seahawk crew received their orders. Cockpit, engine start, hold on deck. The helicopter's turbine startup was audible from the Haijing's bridge at 340 yards. The specific pitch of an MH-60R coming online, a sound that the Haijing's bridge crew had heard before and whose meaning they understood precisely. The Seahawk was not launching. It was demonstrating readiness to launch. The vibration of its rotors, building to flight RPM, transmitted through the air across the 340 yards of South China Sea between the two ships as a frequency that carried information before any visual confirmation was necessary. The Haijing did not alter course, did not reduce speed, did not shut down the water cannons. It had been briefed for this possibility. At 9:26 a.m., the captain made his first non-documentation escalation. Angle 5 degrees to port. New course, 230 degrees. Not a course deviation driven by the Haijing's presence. A 5-degree adjustment that presented the destroyer's bow rather than its beam to the Haijing's water cannon systems. Reducing the profile of the aft electronics cluster by rotating the ship so that the two forward cannons' firing arcs now had to cross the full length of the destroyer's hull to reach the aft systems, adding approximately 50 additional meters of required range to the starboard aft antenna housing. The maneuver was not evasion. It was geometry. The course was 235 degrees and was now 230 degrees, a difference that would not appear as a concession in any footage, a difference whose tactical effect was to make the Haijing's water cannon geometry less effective without giving the Haijing anything it could present as having caused a course change. The CIC updated. CPA to Haijing, now 380 yards and opening marginally. Haijing adjusting course, matching our adjustment. CPA stabilizing at 370 yards. The Haijing had matched the adjustment within 90 seconds, closing back toward its 340-yard station position. It understood what the course change meant and what it did not mean, and it was returning to the geometry that served its purpose. At 9:29 a.m., the second friction arrived, this time from 7th Fleet Command. The encrypted communication circuit delivered a priority message. 7th Fleet Command was tracking the encounter on satellite and requesting a real-time assessment of whether the water cannon activation constituted a physical interference with the freedom of navigation transit, warranting escalated response. The message referenced 3 separate previous CCG water cannon incidents in the South China Sea. 2 involving Philippine vessels, 1 involving a Japanese Coast Guard cutter, and asked the commanding officer to assess whether the current activation was consistent with those precedents or represented an escalation beyond them. The message required a response. The response required the commanding officer's attention. The commanding officer's attention was currently distributed between the tactical picture on the bridge, the maintenance officer's moisture report, the Seahawk status on the flight deck, and the Haijing 5204 at 370 yards with 2 water cannons active. The communication officer drafted a response on the captain's verbal instruction. 3 sentences, factual, delivered in 30 seconds. Water cannon activation confirmed at 9:17 a.m. 2 systems active. Streams landing short of all electronic systems. Moisture trend in SLQ. 32 housing within operational parameters. Course maintained. Escalation ladder being managed in sequence. The message transmitted. The circuit returned to standby. At 9:33 a.m., the Haijing elevated its water cannon arc, not dramatically. The stream from the forward port cannon shifted approximately 8 degrees upward, a change visible to the bridge crew as the arc's landing point moving closer to the destroyer's hull. From landing 80 meters short, the stream was now landing approximately 55 meters short, still not hitting the destroyer, but no longer demonstrating maximum range, demonstrating adjusted range. The message in the adjustment was precise. We have recalibrated. We can go further. The maintenance officer's communication system chimed. Moisture reading in the SLQ 32 housing 6% above baseline. Trend rate unchanged. 41 minutes to 80% parameter threshold. The Seahawk launched at 9:35 a.m. The helicopter lifted from the flight deck and climbed to 200 feet, establishing a track that placed it directly over the gap between the destroyer and the Haijing. Not over the Haijing itself, not in any configuration that could be described as aggressive, but present in the airspace above the water cannon streams, in a way that put a U.S. military aircraft into the immediate operational space of the engagement. The Seahawk's FLIR locked onto the Haijing's water cannon operators on the foredeck, its camera recording in detail that would be available for whatever review was required. The Seahawk's rotor wash reached the sea surface between the two ships and created a disturbance in the water that the high-pressure stream had to cross, not enough to deflect a 2.4 megapascal stream. The physics of a helicopter downwash did not compete with a military specification water cannon, but enough to be present, enough to be a variable in the Haijing's cruise calculation. At 9:37 a.m., the captain launched the second phase of the escalation response. Activate SLQ-32 in active emission mode. Full spectrum sweep, bearing 090 to 135. The SLQ-32 electronic warfare system, the same system whose housing moisture reading had been trending upward for the past 18 minutes, activated in its active emission mode, sweeping the Haijing's bearing with a directed electronic emission that measured every radar and communication system the CCG vessel was operating. The sweep was not a threat. It was a census, but the Haijing's own electronic warfare systems would register the emission immediately, and the Haijing's bridge crew would know that the U.S. ship was electronically mapping every system aboard the Chinese vessel with military precision. Simultaneously, the destroyer's fire control illumination radar activated on the Haijing's bearing. Not a targeting solution, a measurement, the same measurement that the Baltic shoulder and the Taiwan Strait scenarios had produced. We have the precision data on you that matters. The Haijing's bridge team had a decision to make. The Seahawk was overhead. The SLQ-32 was mapping them electronically. The fire control illumination radar was measuring them. The water cannons were still active, still landing short, still producing their humidity gradient. And the U.S. destroyer's course was 230 degrees and had not changed by a degree that any footage could characterize as a concession. The maintenance officer's report at 9:38 a.m. Moisture reading in the SLQ-32 housing 6.4% above baseline. Trend rate slightly reduced. The 5-degree course adjustment had had an effect on the moisture accumulation rate that the maintenance model had not predicted. The changed aspect angle of the hull had slightly reduced the humidity envelope around the aft antenna housing by altering the wind relative position of the water cannon splash zone. Small effect, real effect. 39 minutes to 80% threshold. Extended from the earlier estimate. At 9:41 a.m., the Haijing's forward port water cannon reduced pressure, not shut down, reduced. The visible arc of the stream shortened by approximately 20 meters, its landing point moving back from 55 meters short to approximately 75 meters short. The adjustment was small but unambiguous on the CIC's optical tracking system, which had been recording the stream's arc and landing point since 9:17 a.m. The reduced pressure meant the demonstration of capability was being walked back, the maximum range display being withdrawn. The tactical officer noted it without immediate comment. He watched the display for 45 seconds. The pressure held at the reduced setting. CPA to Haijing, 370 yards. Stable. At 9:44 a.m., the Haijing's forward-starboard cannon, the second system that had activated at 9:19 a.m., shut down. One stream remaining, forward port, at reduced pressure, landing 75 meters short. The captain registered the sequence. He said nothing. At 9:47 a.m., the last water cannon shut down. The arc disappeared. The white stream against the blue South China Sea was gone. The gap between the two ships was seawater and swell, and the rotor disturbance of the Seahawk at 200 feet, and nothing else. The CIC tracked the Haijing for 3 more minutes at 370 yards, matching course and speed, its bridge crew still visible, its deck crew standing down from the water cannon stations and moving aft. Then, the Haijing's engine power increased, a slight acceleration that the CIC registered as a 1-knot speed increase, which over the following 8 minutes opened the bearing and increased the range to 400 yards, then 450. Then the Haijing was no longer precisely abeam, but was beginning to fall aft, its position on the relative bearing plot, drifting toward the destroyer's quarter. Haijing bearing aft, range 520 yards, no longer matching our speed. The shoulder maneuver was ending, not with a dramatic turn, not with a radio call, not with any acknowledgement of what had occurred in the preceding 30 minutes. Simply a slight speed increase, a bearing drift, a ship that had been at 340 yards on the beam, becoming a ship at 520 yards on the quarter, becoming a ship that was no longer present in the immediate tactical picture. The Seahawk held its observation orbit for another 11 minutes before the captain recalled it to the flight deck. The maintenance officer delivered the final moisture report at 9:52 a.m. SLQ 32 housing moisture reading had peaked at 7.1% above baseline at 9:43 a.m., 4 minutes before the last cannon shut down, and had been declining since. Current reading 5.8% above baseline. Trend decreasing. All systems operational. No maintenance action required. The peak moisture reading had reached 7.1% above baseline out of a threshold limit of 100% above baseline. The Haijing's water cannons, active for 26 minutes with streams landing between 55 and 80 meters short of the aft antenna housing, had produced a moisture accumulation in the antenna housing's ambient environment equivalent to 7.1% of the threshold for operational concern. The ship had absorbed 26 minutes of the South China Sea's most capable Coast Guard vessel, directing high-pressure water streams in its direction, and the only measurable consequence was a moisture reading that peaked at 7% of concern and was already declining. The course had been 235 degrees. It was 230 degrees, a 5-degree adjustment made for geometric rather than avoidance reasons, documented as such at a time when the water cannon streams had not yet reached adjusted range. It was not a concession. It was a course. The destroyer was still transiting. The Haijing was aft and opening. At 9:54 a.m., the Haijing's bearing had increased to 6 nautical miles, and the tactical officer reclassified it from immediate concern to background tracking. The helmsman, who had held course 230 degrees for 18 minutes following the 5-degree adjustment, who had held 235 degrees for the 13 minutes before that, for a total of 31 minutes, during which a 12,000-ton Coast Guard vessel had been at 340 yards off his starboard beam with water cannons active, was relieved at 10 a.m. at the standard watch rotation. He handed off the wheel with the quiet efficiency of a watch transfer that had been performed in calm conditions and in conditions that were not calm, and felt, from the outside, identical in both. He went below. He did not go to the fantail. He went to the berthing area and sat on the edge of his rack and looked at his hands, which were resting on his knees and were not moving and were not trembling. And after approximately a minute and a half of looking at them, he decided he was hungry and went to the mess. The situation report reached 7th Fleet Command at 10:15 a.m. It described the Haijing 5204's parallel course approach, the water cannon activation at 9:17 a.m., the 5-degree course adjustment to 230 degrees and its geometric rationale, the moisture trend in the SLQ 32 housing peaking at 7.1% above baseline, the Seahawk launch, the fire control illumination activation, the progressive shutdown of the Haijing's water cannon systems between 9:41 and 9:47 a.m., and the Haijing's bearing aft withdrawal by 9:49 a.m. Transit continued on track. No systems damage, no personnel injuries. 2 paragraphs. The report did not describe what it cost to produce those 2 paragraphs, because that category of cost does not appear in situation reports. 1 China Coast Guard Type 818 class vessel, 12,000 tons, 4 water cannon systems, 2 activated, both subsequently shut down. 30 minutes from initial water cannon activation to full system shutdown. 340 yards. Minimum distance maintained, 7.1%. Maximum moisture reading above baseline in SLQ 32 housing. 0 degrees of course deviation beyond the documented geometric adjustment. 0 electronic systems taken offline. 0 knots reduced from transit speed. The water cannon changes the gray zone calculus because it turns the cost of standing still into something measurable, not footage, not political framing, a moisture reading. The answer to a moisture reading, it turns out, is the same as the answer to every other gray zone instrument that has been directed at a ship holding its course across the South China Sea. Hold the course, document everything, and make sure the person aiming the water cannon understands that the arc landing short is not the end of the response. It is the beginning.